Hello everyone. Once again, thank you very much for joining me for another Q&A session on YouTube. I'll put my phone on silence and we'll start with a couple of questions on regular topics. As usual, I wish there was more diverse questions so I can concentrate on different issues, but there you go. I'll just start talking about the issues that you wanted me to talk. But I chose as main topic why the Hizmet movement supported the AK Party until 2013. So let's start with that question. At this point, just before we start, if you can share this broadcast on YouTube and different channels, I would appreciate that, because this is a YouTube only broadcast and I'm not sure whether everyone has received the channel. Everyone has received the broadcast. So I'll do myself sharing on Twitter and YouTube and different places. You can try to do that as well. Thank you very much. So, once again, we're starting on what urged the Gulen movement to support Erdogan until 2013. So there can be a number of issues, a number of things that can be said about this issue. First of all, there is a huge sociological overlap between the Gulen movement or Hizmet movement and the sociological background of AK Party supporters, main base supporters at least. They're both conservative Muslim families. Conservative meaning, like religiously observant in this context, not necessarily conservative as British Conservative Party or Labour Party sort of a division. It's in fact a religiously observant people. That's what we call conservative in Turkey. So this sociological overlap made it very easy to support a party like AK Party. But before AK Party, although Hizmet has been distant to politics, they have never supported an Islamist party, and AK Party didn't emerge then as an Islamic party to begin with. They emerged as a reactionary movement towards the secular Kemalist establishment, which took the main share of the welfare in the country and hold it for a very long time the most important offices in the country. Even as of today, we can see the conversation about so and so people have infiltrated this bureaucracy and judiciary and military, because that term infiltration even suggests that some of the citizens does not have the right to be, let's say, bureaucrats or military officers or members of judiciary. So their attempt to become or go into that career is always labeled as infiltration. So yes, there is a sociological overlap, and the second point is AK Party was a reactionary movement that was from periphery towards the center, and all the periphery groups, not only Gulen but Alawites, Kurds, to a certain extent liberals, and many other, like a pro-European Union groups have supported AK Party, and it is walked towards the power. And even you can see the world media was praising Erdogan for his reforms on European Union, accession talks and everything. So there was a very good base to support this. But why until 2013? I think although Hizmet movement wasn't very similar to what, like Erdogan's political Islamist agenda, it's quite different. That agenda wasn't there very strongly. That Erdogan gained power within the party over 2-3 terms, and in the third term in 2011 he came to power as a single leader, almost within the party, dominated the party. and then he enforced his agenda much firmly since then. And in my opinion, Hizmet movement didn't see itself as some sort of a guardian of the democratic rights or the republican regime or this and that. So they didn't see this problem. In fact, Gülen called for his followers to move out from Turkey, not because there was a threat about, there was a visible threat about the movement, but he wanted to emphasize on a global vision rather than a Turkey-centered movement. He wanted the movement to become a global movement. So he asked 2 million people to emigrate from Turkey to go and serve around the world, which didn't happen, which ended up like increasing the density of some of the problems. So the problematic relationship was, we can say, late 2010, and it certainly began in 2011, but both parties didn't want to end the relationship in a way that would harm each other. By that, what I mean is there was some sort of a circle that has already emerged within the AK Party and the Gülen movement or Hizmet movement, is that many businessmen who wanted to become who wanted to have the access to networks that movement have in Africa or in Central Asia and different countries to earn more money, to make more successful business ventures, have joined to the movement, and they also were trying to get more business contracts from the government as well. So there was a symbiotic relationship within the that time existing Hizmet members, which most of them have now or left the Hizmet movement since then, because their relationship with Hizmet movement or with the AK Party was based on their gain on the topic, not necessarily an ideological similarity or belief. So those people didn't want this sort of a conflict to start, which wouldn't be good for business. So there was a big chunk of the movement was resisting for that sort of a friction, to a certain extent that they even managed to censor Gülen or filter his thoughts on issues. Like, for instance, when there was a Gezi Park protest, Gülen took a very liberal line and said the protesters should be heard and they shouldn't be dismissed and they shouldn't be degraded or dismissed. But Zaman Daily chose a different line of narrative, very pro-AK Party in that time. So which shows that not everything that was done by the movement or the movement media was endorsed by Gülen. In fact, it went against it in certain times. And when it comes to the biggest corruption case, I think Gülen find it toxic to be affiliated with AK Party publicly, at least, So he put a distance, but we know that he already put a distance way before then. Like, for instance, in one of the recent recordings that government side have presented, that Gülen didn't want to give a quote about a documentary where Erdogan is highly praised. He didn't want to be part of that many years ago. So you can see that there was already distance, but for the sake of the people, the overlapping sociological base for both parties, they actually tried to make it work, which didn't work eventually. Erdogan went away and established a new coalition with the persecuted establishment, the Ergenekon and Balyoz case suspects, let's say, although some of them have been convicted, but not yet confirmed by the higher courts. And then start persecuting the Hizmet movement as the main villain who was the cause of all problems and everything. So if we come back to the question, I think they knew to a certain degree that Erdogan was corrupt, or getting more and more corrupt. But the fact that you imagine something will go wrong doesn't make it wrong. Or, like, if your primary concern is not politics, you don't see that as a major issue. You try to look out for your own safety and your own agenda. I wouldn't expect Hizmet movement, or I wouldn't want Hizmet movement to become a guardian over Turkish regime or anything. So that's totally fine with me. But most certainly, the majority of the Hizmet movement, and some of them have, some individuals especially, have invested personal benefit out of it, wanted to stay good with the government so they can get more fruitful contracts out of it. And they were managed to stirring that wheel very successfully until the corruption allegations came about, where Gülen has broken that bridge irreversibly, which meant that if you want to chase government contracts, now you have to stay away from Gülen or Hizmet movement. Why it was too late? I think since today the movement didn't feel that they grow enough, they didn't feel confident enough to act like a global NGO. Up until very recently, they used to think themselves, although quite influential, but they didn't feel themselves secure enough to stand up for themselves or for others and make comments or press releases about the issues, about social and political issues. They remained silent in many issues, and they thought the silence was the best option and everything. So for that reason, I think it was a delayed option. It could have started in an earlier note with the first signs of Erdogan's authoritarian inclinations, which in some parts, among some of the writers within the movement, some intellectuals has already started criticizing the government, but the wider movement circles have actually silenced these voices, almost censored them, or move them into less influential positions, and so they delayed this separation earlier. And then again, no one really predicted that it would have gone this worse as well. So everyone expected, things will fall apart, including myself. But nobody expected Erdogan will go this far in terms of persecuting the movement. So that is my answer. They knew he was getting more and more authoritarian and corrupt, but there was hope for his march towards the authoritarianism can be stopped by Abdullah Gül or Bülent Arınç or other alternatives. But there wasn't many alternatives that would have changed the course of history in Turkey, because most of political parties in Turkish history was not offering anything very different anyway. So that's my answer to first question. So let's move to the second question. Since there is not many people, I'll just engage with the YouTube followers and then move into next question. So in this period of crisis, Fethullah Gülen appears to be only waiting and observing the situation, but he doesn't give any responsibilities to former Hizmet representatives. Do you think that this could be a signal for a new term period? There is two things. In my opinion, Fethullah Gülen has a plan in his mind, mainly in terms of transforming his movement. I might be wrong, but that's my opinion. Having read about some modernization theories in Islamic societies, which I'm sure Gülen is aware of them as well, like Muhammed Abduh and others, maybe Cemalettin Efkan, I can't remember all of them, but there is a prevailing idea which suggests that the Middle Eastern Islamic societies, at least I can't remember what was the subject at that time, but mainly Islamic societies, cannot quickly move towards the democracy. So there needs to be a gradual move. That gradual move should be administered by an authoritarian ruler who doesn't give any rights to first generation, because they are used to be ruled by authoritarian leaders like kings and sultans. This is in his word, like Gaddafi and Saddam, so they can maintain an order. But these authoritarian leaders, or Atatürk in that case, it doesn't have to be a bad guy in like a dictator in the terms, but this authoritarian leader would transfer some of the power to the second generation in his country, then most of the power in the third, and all the power and responsibility in the fourth, because democracy is not about what people, like what the rights people have, it's about the responsibilities they have as well. For instance, the problem with Turkey is not because Erdogan is a very authoritarian ruler and he dictates everything and this and that. It's also the problem that people almost look out for that. They want that because there is a mentality issue that seeks for like strong leadership, strong rulers, and they want that. People seek for that, and they are happy to pay out with their freedom if needed, as far as they have security and stability, as far as the leader offers that. You can see this sort of narrative is emerging post-Saddam Iraq and post-Gaddafi Libya as well, because there is this, it was still good days, it was better than this. And when people don't take responsibility, they don't know how to negotiate the power, and they don't know how to share. It becomes like a chaos. So for those reasons, there is this strong, firm authoritarian leadership, then micromanagement period, where then the leader moves on to less interventionist, living out of space, and finally leaves the responsibility onto the shoulders of the final generation, who accustom themselves with wider freedom, and the responsibility comes with it. So I think Gülen is administering the second period since 2002-2004, although we have seen that his statements have been reversed, filtered, changed. Even what he said in one of the United States newspapers was censored in his own media outlet about Mavi Marmara flotilla. He said something to, I think, Washington Post, and it wasn't really appeared in Mavi Marmara in Zaman at that time, because they find it dangerous to write it in that sense. So they censored Gülen. So, but he actually let it go. He didn't, do something about that, which means that he transferred some of the authority that he could have easily grabbed to the other people, to ask them to make those decisions, and they make decisions, good or bad decisions, and there we are. So at this moment in time, although he could have actually appointed most of his senior, lieutenants, most of his senior advisors, previous, friends, as in active roles, he didn't do that as well. That created a vacuum around the globe, where people are trying to fill that vacuum themselves, and that is gradually instilling some sort of responsibility and some sort of sense of ownership of the movement as well. And that is the only logical way to move forward, because otherwise Gülen would risk the life of the movement with his biological life. Like if he doesn't transfer this power safely, transfer this responsibility safely to his especially young followers, he would risk the life of the movement. When he dies, everything goes into a chaos again, as it happens most of the times in Middle Eastern or Islamic societies. But if he manages to transfer the power and responsibility and oversees that it works, with a sense of duty and responsibility, with a good conscience, then he can extend the life of the movement and the creativity of the movement. So I think this is an era that he allowed that freedom, which created a lot of problems, which created a lot of problematic middle managers, maybe, or some problematic middle managers. We don't have to exaggerate the numbers. But it was necessary, a learning curve for the movement. But whether the movement in mass, as a whole population, would learn the lesson and take responsibility, hold accountable people, learn to the importance of holding accountable, and allowing the weak voices to be heard, allowing all the colors to exist and respect each other, is a different issue that we will observe in the coming months and years, and I'm hoping that it will happen. With this learning curve, everything will be fine. So then this brings us to third question again. You often argue that Hizmet needs a spokesperson. What do you think about Fethullah Gulen as a spokesman? Is he himself a spokesman or not? He is a spokesman, he is representing the movement, but the spokesman, or the role of spokesman, I imagine, is not something that Gulen would do. Gulen is a leader of a movement which is larger than himself, meaning that includes himself as well. It makes the decisions or the policies or the positions of the movement, has an impact on everyone. And the clarity and ambiguity has an impact on people, followers, and other people around the world. So I think having a spokesperson that talks on behalf of the movement, it doesn't make decisions on behalf of the movement, just clarify the positions where the movement is, just allow the wider world to have an access to ask questions, to ask clarifications, to ask position papers about the movement. Where do you stand on this issue? What do you think about this issue? That sort of a spokesperson would create some sort of clarity. It would be a step towards the institutionalization of the movement. And if that spokesperson makes a mistake, he can admit that it is his own choice, or he made a mistake. If he does a good job, that's brilliant, but it would clear the ambiguity. My point was, for instance, when the movement was accused of plotting the coup in the night of 15th of July, the journalists had difficulty to get a press, a response from the movement. The people they reached didn't see themselves responsible to respond that issue, so they had to involve everyone, and then eventually within an hour or so they compiled a press release, and within 2 hours certainly it was on the major outlets denying the involvement in the coup, even before the opposition party leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu in Turkey. However, for two hours at least on BBC Primetime, the movement appeared as, in these terms, there is a military intervention, coup is undergoing in Turkey. Erdogan or government blames the Gulenists, and Gulenists didn't deny this yet. They didn't deny this yet. And eventually, when they denied, it looked like as if they have waited to see which way it will go, and then they will deny that. So it stick with them. It stick with the Hizmet movement. And if there was a spokesperson who would have just intervened and tweet about it, it would have been a lot easier to deal with the mess afterwards. So for that reason, just because whether the people like it or not, there is a need of some sort of institutionalization. Let me put it this way: people are applying around the world for asylum in different countries, and one of the biggest things is there is no point of reference that they could get a paper or an identification that would certify that they are Gulen movement members or Hizmet movement members. If there was a spokesperson, there would have been at least a reference point. So no one wants to see the movement becoming too informal and lose all its spirituality, but it's also only fair and wise to respond to the needs of its time. Otherwise, not having a spokesperson doesn't mean a good policy, a fruitful policy. In the near future, when things happen, similar issues will emerge unless Gülen is alerted and he's been informed about whatever is going on and then made a statement about it. And I think that's a very, very wrong way to deal with this. If there was a man who can be reached via Twitter and Facebook and this and that, and that man doesn't have to be a very important person. He's just a person who reads the statements and also, as far as his knowledge, says the position of the movement, or he can clarify and he say we'll make an official statement about this, and that would clear out a lot of stuff. That's my opinion. Thank you. Very nice question. So the Kitab says, Hizmet so-called academics give advices and point out Hizmet's past mistakes. Where were they when Hizmet was making those so-called mistakes? And why did they choose not to warn us out loud, but having kept their knowledge about these mistakes to themselves? First of all, I will always challenge for any member of the Hizmet movement who advocates for education dialogue and charity activities, which everyone agrees that they do this or Hizmet does this, but then comes up and undermines the value of academics and the importance of the science and education and everything. It's just an oxymoron. Whenever I read something, the demeaning, devaluing any importance of, as if becoming academic is an illness, something wrong, so-called academics and this and that. That's not nice. That doesn't sound right as well. That just sounds very AK Party. Some as if this guy, if he was in Erdogan's place, he would exactly say this sort of stuff. So-called academics, they're all terrorists and this and that. Anyway, regardless, to moving to the point, I find this line of narrative very, very dangerous. That's why I keep reminding people that this is not the right way to address. But it's a valid question why these academics didn't make. First of all, academics are not fortune tellers. Mainly, especially in sociology of religion, you observe, and you can only observe patterns that are going towards somewhere. Today I shared one of my observation, and unless that happens, I'm wrong. But it might happen. That's one pattern that we have seen in some other religious group who reacted similarly, and they end up in similar positions. But that's a pattern. Then you can say it looks like this movement is following this pattern. But in reality, the real scientific study can be done after the event. When bank crisis happened, then you can say this has happened because of this. We've studied this issue. It looks like there was this problem and that problem and this problem, and it wasn't addressed in time. And there you go. You have. So there is no point in not learning anything from past mistakes. And that's the only way to actually establish a more secure system in the future. So the fact that they weren't there wouldn't diminish any importance of their work if they're trying to do something today. And many of them, which they argued that they were there, they were saying things, and it wasn't loud and clear. People weren't willing to listen because they were very successful. Everything was very well. It was all fine. So there wasn't anything to be worried and this and that. So it was the critical voices within the Hizmet were undermined. So that is another thing. So there is no need to undermine. It's a fire that burns everyone, and everyone can only help in their own way. And there is no point expecting an academic. There is no value in expecting an academic, although they may choose to do so, to help, just like working on minimum wage and supporting the needed people. It's better for them to write about it, to deal with this issue, to try to contribute in their own way by trying to understand the issues. That's why they are educated in these issues. So there you go. That's my answer. It's, I think, the you can observe a pattern that leads towards somewhere, but that pattern always can be challenged. You can say our movement is a special movement. It won't follow the same pattern. It looks like same, but it's different. That's an argument. This is an argument. We don't know what will happen. It's just a warning, and not all warnings are supposed to be, proven. And you don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies as well. But it is only fair to just warn, and these warnings are only good if you're warned. You can prepare yourself rather than dismiss that warning or and demean the person who did that warning. That's not a clever way to deal with these issues, especially in a very, very dangerous crisis time. The next question is about Aber Fatihi. Are there new and non-Turkish sympathizers joining the Hizmet movement? Is there such a mechanism or will in the movement? Let's say a non-Turk wants to join, how they can do that? They can join, there is no problem with that. It's just not necessarily very well encouraged. If they don't know Turkish, it becomes very hard for them to get involved more. You will see, most of circles are still in Turkish. Every conversation is still in Turkish. So it is hard. It still feels like joining into it still feels like joining into a transnational Islamic movement, which have its roots in Turkish identity very strongly. So if you're not a Turkish person, or at least if you can't speak Turkish, it's very hard to be an efficient member of the Hizmet movement. But it's not impossible. You can always join. But I am hoping that that will improve in time. It's not a matter of like you can always join. It's a matter of really valuing and trying to get that richness, and not addressing only Turkish roots or Turkish citizens or Turkish speaking people, but to also wider society who share the similar concern about education, dialogue and charity activities. But in simple words, they can join. Another question from the same Twitter user, Aber Fatihi. A bit sensitive but an important question for an Islamic movement that is looking to go global. I'm not sure about that. I mean, like, it's the intuition or the defining motion of the Gulen or Hizmet movement is going towards the global. But can the people who are in this movement will be able to achieve that? I don't know. We don't know how the majority of people who are persecuted in the prisons today will be responding, and how they would like to, how are they going to visualize the movement in the future. We don't know, and how that will impact the wider movement and its identity, we don't know. So that's a hope that it will go global, because the world needs a global Islamic movement, a very successful, a good one. What's the movement's take on LGBT Muslims and non-Muslims alike? If there is none, what should it be? I don't think this is a matter that most of Hizmet people have lost their sleeps over, especially not today. I would automatically assume 2 points. Gulen, having relieved all the pressures, all the constraints, he would probably make a very liberal approach, because most of the LGBT issue doesn't have a problem within Islam. If you just if you just read into fiqh about it, you can see that existings or the rights and the responsibilities of LGBT are there. It's debated, discussed. It's just somehow forgotten, and Islam become a homophobic religion. It changed with many other stuff around it, and the arguments can be different about why it become what it become today. But well, LGBT people are considered as good as others. the practicing of, let's say, lesbian, bisexual, or trans relationship can be a problematic issue. But remember, Islam doesn't even allow, man and woman having a relationship outside their marriage as well. It's not limited to anyone. The problem here too seems to be that Islam does not also recognize a marriage between man and woman, like in this way. But then again, as what is the right word? As once Erdogan decided to ban all the mixed houses because it was against Islamic ethos to girls and boys living in same student houses, so he wanted to outlaw that, which he did. And then LGBT communities in Turkey sent a thank you letter to Erdogan to make it officially, recognized that men should live with each other and women should live with each other. That's very, very pro LGBT sort of. They made a point about the issue, which is the case. Most of most of religious interpretation in Turkey by default are very, very open to these issues, but by culture they are far from facing these issues. We have never had a chance to discuss what would be the fiqh for a man to handshake with another man who may have like the other person or find him attractive. Whether there is anything different between like in terms of how to engage with in those circumstances and everything. So this is a fresh issue. I don't think like there is it's a well worked area, but certainly needs addressing and discussing. And the more we get rid of the ignorance, I think the better it will be. One last question. Kafamdaki tilkiler 2. How can we rescue people under persecution in Turkey with large groups? Is it possible to plan a project like Kinder Transport in World War II? Just because of this tweet, I looked into Kinder Transport. It refers to thousands of children from Germany, Poland, and different places. Depends on their needs, mainly from, of course, Jewish heritage, and mainly among the ones who are most dependent or needy or lost their families, were transported to UK and different European countries to be given to other families or foster in the foster housed and in different places. With this effort, many thousands of children were saved from concentration camps. I think something similar can be done, especially if you heard the recent news about a woman whose ex-husband was imprisoned on the grounds of being Gulenist, and she had a 99% disabled son, a 17-year-old. She lost, her ability to cope with the increasing stress. And a couple of days ago, she shot her son first with a shotgun, and then commit suicide with the same shotgun herself. And this is a very sad situation. This definitely needs an answer before things get even worse. There should be some sort of ways to, like, people who are abroad maybe should volunteer themselves to look after one or two children, at least until these crises are over. But there will be a lot of transport problems, a lot of issues which can be dealt, but at least that is something needs to be done. I think if children were rescued for a couple of years, their education continued, and they are saved from this traumatic situation in Turkey, that would definitely be a very, very appreciated thing to do. I hope someone comes up with a project to apply this, and I'll be supporting that. Thank you very much. I'll just quickly look whether there is any questions on YouTube. Companies and countries are usually have spokesperson. Do we want to become either one? NGOs have spokesperson as well, so it's not only them. I heard the Hizmet movement acted a part in the supporting period that caused that Turkey was an authoritarian one. Do you agree with that? I think some of the things that Hizmet did has played into those that culture as well. It's almost it's a good point. It's a valid point. It's a hard one to bite, but I don't think Hizmet movement is in general very, very different than the rest of the Turkey. We are all children of Kemalism in a sense that we adore strong leaders, charismatic leaders. We find exciting to follow that and this, and that's authoritarianism. In like when it gets out of hand, you see that charismatic leaders start abusing and everything. Not that all charismatic leaders would do that, but there you go. You made it easy for that to happen, just like Turkish people made it easy for Erdogan to abuse them. So that's what I think. Dear bright future. Thank you very much for all of you to joining me today, and we'll see you in another program. If you want to support, these are the links that and your support is much appreciated, because everything I do is actually based on those supports. And thank you very much if you are already supporting, and see you on the next program.